on today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Our guest for this episode is Bob Furniss. Bob Furniss's life changed forever when his daughter Keesha was diagnosed with breast cancer. Sadly, she passed away in November of 2017. After she died, he found new purpose by trying to help other young women by encouraging early detection. That's why he and his wife, Susan, founded warriorprincess.org.
We give each other room to have bad days. Susan will ask me, "Are you okay?" when I'm quiet, and I'll ask her the same things. And it's hard to believe that as many years since 2017 to now that it's been, that you still have those days. But the reality is you still do as parents. There's a word for when you lose your wife or your husband, a widower or a widow, but there's no word in the English language for losing a child. There's no individual word for it. And I think it's because it can't be summed up in one word.
Let's join the conversation with Bob Furniss.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, our guest today is Super Dad Bob Furniss. Bob, hello, and welcome to the show today.
Not sure anyone's ever called me Super Dad, but I like it. I'll have you follow me around and introduce me every time.
I'll be your wingman.
Okay, that sounds good.
So I'm sure you're aware that there was an actor on Scarecrow and Mrs. King by the name of Bob Furniss. Same spelling as yours.
It is. I am aware of that. Yeah.
Were you ever Scarecrow?
No, I was never Scarecrow.
So what do people still know about that role, that character?
I know about it because I've searched myself on Google. I don't get anybody. I think we may be beyond the time frame for average person to watch Scarecrow. It was Scarecrow and Mrs. King, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember the show. When I pull up on IMDb, he comes up. Bob Furniss comes up. So,
but it's not you.
It's not me. It is not me.
Okay. So the serious topics that we're going to be discussing today. So I've got some questions about your work with breast cancer research and detection. So Bob Furniss's life changed forever when his daughter Keesha was diagnosed with breast cancer. Sadly, she passed away in November of 2017. And Bob, I extend my condolences on the loss of your beloved daughter.
Thank you so much.
After she died, you found new purpose by trying to help other young women by encouraging early detection. Please tell me about the warriorprincess.org site and the mission of the organization.
Yeah, the mission of the organization is to impact women who are in the ages of 25 to 40 or up to 45, because that is an age where breast cancer actually exists, and it actually, in the last 4 or 5 years, seems to have increased in the amount of women who are diagnosed in that age group. So, but if you go to your doctor or you read about cancer, breast cancer, you typically see that insurance companies start paying for mammograms when you're 40, unless you have some sort of history in breast cancer. Our sweet daughter had no history. It was a total shock. She was going to a regular doctor for a couple of things that we later found out to be connected to the breast cancer. But our organization has a mission to impact women in that age group, to get them to do two things: to go to the gynecologist or talk to their normal healthcare provider about breast cancer, and about getting a clinical breast exam on an annual basis, and then also to doing monthly breast checks, breast self checks, and those are our two main goals: is to impact women to do that.
All right. Your book is called On to Blue: The Story of a Breast Cancer Warrior Through the Eyes of a Dad. What does On to Blue mean?
So On to Blue is a story that is the last story in the book. And it is a story that probably needs some preface stories to go with it for it to make sense. But let me start there. Our daughter was diagnosed at 30 years old, and she died at 34. She was a vibrant, beautiful kindergarten teacher who she used to say, I don't have any children of my own. I have hundreds of children that I've impacted through the years as a kindergarten teacher. So when we found this, she sort of became a different person. Before, she was a quiet, not very connected to a small group of people, not very loud on social or anything like that. But after she was diagnosed, she began to post on social media and on be a part of various groups that were online. And she lived her life out loud on social about her breast cancer. She mentored other women who were finding out they had metastatic breast cancer. Metastatic means that it has left the original place. You can have metastatic kidney cancer. You can have metastatic breast cancer. She had breast cancer in her breast, but she also had it in her bones and in her lungs. So the On to Blue was a story that, On to Blue was a story that came about at near the end of her life. So she was a salesperson for a multi-level marketing organization called Unique, which is a makeup company. And she was actively involved. She started that about 2 years into her survivorship. And I can remember that she was so devoted to selling makeup online. I can remember her sitting in a chair in the living room and being on chemo drugs and just throwing up for 5 or 10 minutes at a time, and sitting back up and wiping her face off and saying, well, I'm going to get up and go make a video on Facebook about my Unique. I'll be back in a little bit. And she would go in her room and she would turn on her Facebook, and she would do a live of her doing makeup with the idea of showing somebody how to use a particular mascara or a particular eyeliner, and them wanting to buy that. So in that organization, their focus was on women, as you can imagine, with makeup. But what I learned is it was a organization that connected women to other women. And whenever she got very sick, she was at the yellow level. So as you can imagine, in a multi-level marketing environment, there's different levels. And it was sort of apropos that pink was the next level that she wanted to reach. Well, with her being sick and her being limited in her abilities, it didn't look like she was ever going to make it to peak. And I got a call from her boss's boss's boss. So the person that was very high in the organization that had heard her story was connected to her, talked to her multiple times. And she said, Bob, we want to do something special for Keesha. We want to let her reach pink. So I've checked with the company, and we're going to apply all of the sales for 2 days from all of the women on her in her downline and in her upline that are willing to do it. We're going to have it assigned to her account so that she can reach pink status. So they did that. About 4 days later, I got a call from Sean, and she said, Keesha made it. And unfortunately, this was the last, I believe that this happened, the phone call happened about 2 days before she actually ended up dying. And Sean said, well, call me when she's awake, because at this point she wasn't awake very, very much. And so the next morning at 6 o'clock, my wife came into the bedroom and woke me up and said, hey, Keesha's awake and she's lucid and she wants to talk to you. And so I went into the bedroom and into her bedroom and was talking to her. And Susan said, we should tell Sean. So I call Sean. Sean's on the West Coast. It's 4 o'clock in the morning there. She picks up the phone and I said, Keesha is lucid and awake. Do you want to tell her that she made pink? And she said, absolutely. She said, let me call you back on FaceTime so I can see her sweet face. So she calls in on Facebook. I hand Keesha the phone, and Sean begins to tell her that she's made pink status. And Keesha's face just lights up the entire room with a smile that is so wide and so big, no matter how bad she was sickness wise. And so they talked for a little bit about what it meant to be pink, and she congratulated Keesha, and Sean was ready to hang up. And Sean said, okay, Keesha. And Keesha said, well, on to blue. And I didn't know what that meant. So I walked out of the room. I had Sean on the phone, and I said, Sean, what did she mean by on to blue? And she said, Bob, blue is the next status. She's already thinking about what she's going to do next. And I thought that was such a testament to who she was as a survivor. For 4 years, she focused on living and not on dying. She didn't focus on what was going to happen next, other than to focus on how she was going to live better, how she was going to live longer. She grew up with severe ADD, not ADHD. She wasn't hyper. She was just very quiet and struggled with multiple things. If I went into her room when she was in elementary school and I said, hey, Keesha, you need to put on your socks and shoes. You need to get your books, put them in the bag, and meet me in the car in 5 minutes. We got to go. You're going to be late for school. The reality is I gave her 3 too many things to do because she could only focus on one thing. And that was a struggle when she was a child. It was a struggle for this dad when she was a child, for a dad who lived off of list, type A, always running to and fro, having multiple tabs open on his laptop, always getting more things done than humanly possible. She could focus on one thing. But that ability actually became her superpower when she got sick, because when she got sick, she was focused on one thing, and that was on living and nothing else. And so the On to Blue I named the book On to Blue because of 3 things. One is that story and the power of that story, that somebody that was near death was not accepting that, not in a fanciful way or an unrealistic way. She knew how sick she was, but in a way where she was just determined that she was going to live another day and she was going to live another week. And secondarily, it has reference on the front of the book. There's a picture of a girl on the beach. So it has reference to the blue water because the blue of the ocean was her favorite. And then third, the blue of heaven and the blue of the sky, and the belief that that's where we're going to see her someday in the future.
Okay, I appreciate all that context. That helps to understand the story better. And you talk about your memoir, On to Blue. It tells the story of a daughter's cancer journey through the eyes of a father. What was the most challenging aspect of putting together this perspective into words?
The toughest part, it was the hardest part, and it was the best part. So the hardest part was reliving those stories. And while she was sick, I helped her tell stories. So I've been a storyteller and a speaker and a writer for a long time. And I asked her, do you want me to help tell your story? So I would write a story about a particular, she would go to a Luke Bryan concert and something special would happen. So I would write a story about it and post it on social. And then she would amplify it by retweeting it or reposting it on Facebook or on Instagram. And so I helped her tell this story. But I'm sorry, what was your question again?
What was the most challenging part about putting
the challenging part? The most challenging part was reliving those moments.
Yeah.
And there were days when I would have to just shut down my laptop and walk downstairs, and I would tell my wife, I can't write anymore for a couple of days. It's killing me. But the negative was also the positive, in that it reminded me of the stories of how strong she was. And then there were some stories that would come to mind as I was sitting there thinking about her childhood and about her in high school and in college. I would remember a story that was a real positive or a funny story that I could write about her. And so it was cathartic and it was therapeutic, but it was also very tough to write stories knowing that it was me putting her life into writing.
So that part was cathartic for you. What about your wife, Susan? How has she dealt with this?
So Susan was her primary caregiver, and she was, even before this happened, Keesha would call her mom her best friend. She had best friends, but her and Susan had a relationship that, quite honestly, I sometimes was a little jealous of. They were more like sisters at times than they were about mother and daughters, especially as Keesha got older. And so Susan, during those 4 years, her focus was on caregiving and making sure that Keesha was getting the best care possible, both in our home where she lived during her sickness and whenever she went to the doctor. And she was at the oncologist office clinic probably on average 2 to 3 times a week for various things throughout those 4 years. So she focused on caregiving. Since then, we've had conversations on the couch about the pain and the grief. In the book, I talk about that grief, and I've had people tell me that the book is very raw from that perspective. So her grief is different than my grief, but in reality, I read stories about people who've gone through this with losing a child, and it pulls them apart and pulls their marriage apart. I believe that it's actually pulled us together. We lean on each other on days when I have bad days, or I'm thinking about Keesha and I've been upstairs on a podcast, or I've been somewhere talking about her, and I have a bad day. I just go downstairs and say I'm having a bad day. And she does the same thing. And that's something that we talked to Keesha about when she was sick. She had this mentality that I'm better than I am. If you ask her, how are you doing? If she said, I'm okay, that meant she was not doing very well. If she said, I'm pretty good, that meant she was almost good. And if she said, I'm good, that meant that she was having a really good day. So we do the same thing. We give each other room to have bad days. Susan will ask me, "Are you okay?" when I'm quiet, and I'll ask her the same things. And it's hard to believe that as many years since 2017 to now that it's been, that you still have those days. But the reality is you still do as parents. There's a word for when you lose your wife or your husband, a widower or a widow, but there's no word in the English language for losing a child. There's no individual word for it. And I think it's because it can't be summed up in one word.
Yeah, that's just not the normal course of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Children are supposed to bury the parents, not the other way around.
Right.
So another challenge that you and Susan are facing, I read that you were diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2020. How are you managing your own health while crusading against breast cancer?
Well, I tell people my daughter set the bar pretty high. So when she was sick, I used to tell her that, "Sweetheart, if I was you, I would be laying in bed in a fetal position and just wanting it to all stop with the sickness that she went through." She raised the bar pretty high to say, "Hey, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to deal with this, and I'm going to make it another day," as I told the story. But the reality is Parkinson's is a growing disease. My doctor says that if you know one person with Parkinson, you know one person with Parkinson's, because it's so different between one person and the other person. You could put 3 people in the room and all 3 of them may have similar symptoms, but they all have different symptoms. And so my symptoms has actually played out a little bit in this interview, because at times I struggle for words, and it's different than the typical, when as you get older, you lose words. I actually lose entire concepts. And that's the reason why I decided to stop working full time in what I had done for my entire career, which was working customer service. And for the last 20 years, I've been a consultant in that space.
So as a father supporting your daughter through breast cancer, what unexpected emotional challenges did you face that aren't typically discussed in cancer support resources?
I think the reality of her dealing with the finality of stage 4 breast cancer. If you find breast cancer in stage 1 or stage 2, you have a very high chance of survival. It's as much as 95 to 98% if it's found in stage 1. So for a woman, that's the reason why our nonprofit is so focused on self-exams, because 80% of breast cancer is found by the patient first. They find a knot, they have something in their breast that makes them question something, and they talk to a doctor, and then it finds out that they have breast cancer. So the breast cancer that she had been there for a while, and she had missed things that in hindsight, if she had paid attention to them, she might be here today. But so my focus was, let's don't focus on how you got here, sweetheart. It doesn't really matter that you missed something. It matters, but it's not anything that you can fix. So let's focus on the future. Let's focus on today. Let's focus on tomorrow. And so as a dad, I couldn't fix things. As a dad, if she got married and she got divorced, she could come and live with us. If she had a boyfriend that treated her bad, I could go over to his house and threaten to hit him in the nose if he did it again. As a dad, I could do the things that a dad does, but I couldn't fix cancer. I couldn't fix it. So what I tried to do was to put things in front of her that were 2 to 3 weeks out: a concert, going to Disney, going to the botanical gardens, going to a concert, whatever I could do to put in front of her so that she was looking forward to something. And I recommend that to anybody that's dealing with relatives or friends who are dealing with chronic illness, is to put something in front of them every 3 to 4 weeks so that they have something to look forward to. She would walk out of a concert with Luke Bryan concert, and who she was a crazy nut over. She would walk out of a Luke Bryan concert, and on the way home, she would go, "I'm going to Disney World in 3 weeks. I'm so excited." So it was the part that I believe happens is it's really easy to get sucked into the reality of death, and it's hard to live as if you're going to live and not going to die. And that's what my focus was.
All right. We've all heard, or most of us have heard about the golden rule, that doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. You talk about the platinum rule. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, it's to love people the way that they want to be loved. And I found this through something that I read back when I was running call centers in the customer service world. And I used to talk about loving the people that were on my team or loving the people in my contact center. And I used to speak about it. And sometimes when I would speak, somebody would come up to me afterwards and go, "Wow, you're telling me that you love the people that you work with, but I don't even like some of the people I work with." So the love is a different kind of love. But what I meant by that when I was in business was to understand who the person was and what their goals in life were and what was important to them. So in a contact center, you could walk up to somebody who was sitting in their cube, and if there were 37 photos of a 2-year-old, you knew that either it was their grandchild or their child. And so if you're the right kind of manager, the right kind of person, you ask a question about them. So who's that? How's he doing? What's the latest thing that he's done? So you're loving them the way that they want to be loved, because that's what they love in life. And for Keesha, it was loving her the way she was. Now, I struggle with that. And if I could go back in time, one of the questions somebody asked me in a podcast, if you could go back, what would you change? And one of the things I would change is I would love her a little bit better with her ADD. Now, she had ADD to the point that it was detriment in school. She struggled in school. She struggled in different things that she tried to accomplish, but she always tried. And I'll give you a great example of that. So she decided she was going to march in the high school marching band. And me being a dad, knowing how bad her ADD was and how much I went to the practice, and I'm like, there's no way she's ever going to do this. She's going to end up on the 20-yard line on this end of the field, and the band's going to end up on the 20-yard line on this end of the field, and she's just going to be out there all by herself. And we went out the first night that she was marching at high school, and I got up on the top of the press box with my video camera, and I'm sitting there recording, and I'm thinking, please don't let her mess up. Please don't let her mess up. And she did so well. I'm sitting there with tears rolling down my eyes the whole time because she did so good at what she did. Well, that led to her marching in the college band at University of Memphis in the mighty Sound of the South with about a 250 person band. And once again, Dad had no faith and thought, oh my gosh, this is going to end wrong. This is going to end bad. But somewhere in the middle of the second year, I said something to her about, hey, how do you keep up with being able to march like that and know you got to go left or right and play music? And she goes, oh, Dad, I don't play music while I'm marching. I just move my fingers. She says, I just move my fingers when I'm marching. When I stand still, I start playing again. I have ADD. I can only do one thing at a time. and not only do one thing at a time. And it hit me, and I've talked about this even before the book, is make your weakness your superpower, and don't let it hold you back. It didn't hold her back. She still marched in the band. It was part of her identity was to march in the band, but she figured out how to adjust her life to deal with her disabilities. And that is such a powerful lesson.
That is a powerful lesson. Very powerful lesson. So during this journey, I'm sure you learned a lot about the healthcare and communications. What advice would you give to healthcare medical professionals about supporting families in these situations?
So number one is, if you're in the healthcare space and you're talking to a 25 to 40-year-old woman. So Keesha was going to her primary care physician, and the primary care physician was not doing breast exams and was not even talking to her about her breast. So the first thing is to be sure that if you're a healthcare person, that you are asking women who are in their 20s if they are going to the gynecologist, and if not, would they like you to give them a clinical breast exam? Because just like when I go to the urologist, my urologist looks at me differently as a man, a gynecologist looks at the woman differently and ask her different questions. And so Keesha said, I wasn't going to the gynecologist because I wasn't sexually active. Valid reason to not go to the gynecologist if you don't know better. But if you know better, you need to have that exam so that you know whether or not you have it, and so that you find it in stage 1 or stage 2. And I'll tell you one other story. So sometimes people say, wow, you're a man and you showed up to talk about breast cancer at this event. That's a little different. Well, that came out of me writing a story the year after she died. And it was really the catalyst for believing that I could write a book about this. Was I wrote an article to the local newspaper, and it was called The Question That Every Dad Should Ask His Daughter. Because I was asking my daughter, do you have gas in the car? Are you being careful when you get in your car at night? Are you being careful in the parking lot? You know, I was asking her all of the dad questions, but I never asked her, hey, are you going to the gynecologist, or are you getting are you doing monthly breast exams? And while I don't blame myself, I know that if I had heard somebody tell this story and I had asked my daughter, was she doing it? I would have said to her, oh my gosh, you've got to go after hearing this story. So that's the catalyst for me telling my story and her story is to impress upon dads and moms and aunts and uncles and women and men to ask the people around them about their breast health. And if it's uncomfortable and you don't know how to do it, you can go on our website and we'll send you a card that looks like this, that you hang on the shower, and it has all the icons of the ways to do the breast exam and all of the instructions on the back. And if you're a father who's a little nervous about talking to your 25-year-old about breast health, just tell them, hey, I heard this podcast and I heard this story from this guy about his daughter, and I want you to take this and read it and do this because I think it's important in your life. So that's the reason that I do what I do.
Well, that's an important objective. And thinking about this and making it personal, I've got 3 daughters who are between the ages of 25 and 34. So it sounds like I need to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, and I had how I figured out that was my focus for the nonprofit, or that was our focus for the nonprofit. And another quick story, I was in Boston and doing some consulting work. This was not too long after she died, probably in 2018. And I finished early, and I looked on the calendar and found out that there was the Cheers bar was around the corner. So I walked over to Cheers bar. I sat down at the bar, and I was having a drink and thinking about all the characters of Cheers. And it doesn't look anything like the bar on TV, but it's still the original Cheers that the writers wrote about. And this couple sat down beside me, young couple, probably probably younger than me, but not that much younger than me. And we struck up a conversation, and the woman asked me a question that up until that time, no one had asked me. She said, "Hey, how many kids do you have?" And in a flash, what ran through my brain was, do I tell her about Keesha? I'll definitely tell her about Kevin. I've got a 39, 38, 39. Oh my gosh, I don't know. He was born in 87. 38-year-old son with 3 lovely grandchildren. And I love talking about them and talking about what he does in life and how successful he is. But what ran through my brain was, do I want to talk about Keesha? Can I handle this? Do I just say I have 1, or do I say I have 2? And I decided to say I have 2. And so I told her about Kevin, and then I told her about Keesha, and I told her the story of her losing her life to breast cancer at just 34 years old. And so the husband looked at the wife and said, just like you just said, "Hey, we've got 2 20-year-old, 25, I think it was a 26-year-old and a 28-year-old. We have 2 daughters. Hey," he's asked his wife, "do you know whether they're going to the gynecologist and doing breast exams?" And the wife said, "No, I don't, but I will know it by the end of the day before I close my eyes tonight. I'll ask that question." And as I got into the Uber after that on the way to the airport, it occurred to me that maybe that was the point. Maybe the point was to just tell her story and tell her just her story to people like you. And then you're able to say to your daughters, "Hey, you need to do this." And maybe they don't find anything, and maybe they do. 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime in the U.S. So what we hope is that your daughters search and find nothing, and they continue to search for the rest of their life, and they find nothing. But if they do find something, what we hope is that they find it early. And I know that is the most important part when it comes to breast cancer.
Oh, that's a valuable lesson, one that I hope will get through loud and clear to everybody, and that people will actually follow through on it.
Yeah.
So as we wind down this conversation, my last question for you is, what final bit of advice would you like to leave with the listeners today?
So in the book, there is a section at the end of every chapter or part. It's not really in chapters, it's really in parts. There's 5 parts to the book, but there's some little bullet points, and I call them Keesha-isms, because in her quiet manner, she used to speak a lot of amazing truth. And I went back and looked at the notes that I'd taken while she was sick. And so I'll give you a couple of them. So don't let your disabilities affect your ability to see the positives in life. That was one of hers. Learn to adapt to your limitations and disabilities and how they can become your superpowers. That was the one about the band. And then this one is really simple. I found this in one of her journals. She wrote in very large caps, "Just keep swimming." And so I tried to figure out where did that come from? Well, that was Dory from the movie Finding Nemo, and she was lost, and she wasn't real sure what to do, and the 2 fish were lost and weren't real sure what to do. And Dory said, "Just keep swimming." So no matter how hard life gets, just keep swimming, and you'll be okay.
That sounds good. So our guest today has been father of Kevin and Keesha, Bob Furniss.
Yes.
Thanks for being here today, Bob. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest today and the things we discussed, including a link to his book and the website for Warrior Princess. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.